Okay, so to my fellow leaders, the discussion, of course, is based on operations and the board. We'd like to hear how you do things in your own agencies, what works, what doesn't work. What is the one takeaway that you feel would improve things? It's a tall ask.
I'll start. Dave will contradict me. Okay, are we ready? You let me know when we're ready. Okay, so at Glen Oaks, we do have a fairly good separation of board and operations. While all of our board members are members of the organization, the board selects the operations chief, who is not a member of the board and is a non-voting member of the board of directors. So there is that separation. The board are members. There's a 7-member board. They're all members of the organization in good standing, but they are not the operations chief. The operations chief is selected by the board and is a non-voting member of the board. So that's a good thing, I think. I think where we have the challenge, and we've had a discussion on this in the past at Glen Oaks, is about the potential to bring in some community board members, some professionals from the community who would be added to and augment our board of directors. That discussion was had a few years ago. It didn't really go anywhere. But I think that if we renewed the discussion now, I think there is a different mindset on the board, and there might be an openness and willingness to bring in some community board members on the board. I like Matthew's suggestion that one way to assuage some of those fears is to make sure that those community members are in fact elected or endorsed by the membership. So I think that's one of the goals that we can start talking about. I don't know if Dave wants to. Dave is our chairman of the board of directors. So we have that separation too. I'm the president, he's the chairman, and we have a chief of operations. And it works reasonably well for Glen Oaks.
Yeah, and I mean, on that same topic, what works really well for us is that we have, our board members are volunteers who are not only been there for, I won't say too many years, but over a decade. I think all of our board members have been there for over a decade, if not 15, 20, even 30 or 40 years. They're very close to the operations of the organization. And when I say operations, I mean the day-to-day. So they're very involved in all those little things that happen, which sometimes can be too much. Like there's kind of I'm gonna make up fake names. There's the Steve show, there's the Mike show, that one person's in charge of too many responsibilities at the same time. But what also happens is that it's very close knit. So I think what we do also really well, and is part of the transition to maybe doing something community-based, is that we have kind of similar to an operations staff, we call them vice presidents. So we'll have vice presidents in charge of the administrative committees, and then the vice president in charge of kind of like the operational EMS. So it's kind of like, what makes you an EMS organization? An ambulance, medical supplies, training. What makes you a nonprofit? Community affairs, community outreach, fundraising, stuff like that. Keeping that communication and really having a system more than just like, one board seeing everybody, but a communication. So maybe like an executive board where community members get involved. And it's not like I need, this retired ED doctor to know about, like we were saying, like fixing the plumbing. But somebody's still making sure that the plumbing's being fixed. And that's kind of the operations staff.
Well, our board of directors at Bed-Stuy is consisted of non-EMT, non-medical personnel, except the president, of course. He's a paramedic. We also have our operation board with our high-ranking officer, and there's our chief of staff, and we report to the president. So we basically interchange. He's the person that basically like liaison between the operations and the board of directors. We have lieutenants and captains. We have captains and lieutenants who runs like, communications, community affairs, training, and things of that sort. So that's how we separate it. And we're actually looking to expand our board of directors from 5 people to 9 people. Like you said, in order to allow people from the community to come in, give them information on the organization so they can feel a part of it. Because at the end of the day, all of our organizations are community-based organizations.
I love you.
I know you. They actually spoke a lot.
Jerry.
What? At Ridgewood, we do have a board of directors and we do have an operations staff, but there's really no distinction between our board of directors and our operations staff. All our operation members are on the board of directors. Yes, so basically we do have just board members, but then our captain and our lieutenants of operations and administrations are on our board of directors. So a lot of times there's no separation. The operations, I mean, I've been doing it long enough, so I'm aware that I'm supposed to just be taking care of the day-to-day stuff. So normally when I do go to a board meeting, I try to have my report done and handed in beforehand, so it doesn't get to the operations. But because there's no distinction, our board becomes an operations meeting and our operations become a board meeting. Because there are board members that sit on our operations meeting. So there's really no separation. That's why I was trying to figure it out. Because I've been on another board in my other agency where there was complete separation of board and operations.
It works both ways.
Yes.
The chief will be able to stay out of my business.
Not even, I mean, we tried to help each other out, but it gets a little complicated. It gets confusing for the members. They're like, well, this is the board. Why are they doing the operations stuff? And to try to explain to the members that the operations team really, we're the ones that you should see because we're supposed to be there every day. You don't need to see the board of directors. They are doing the administrative part. It's nice to meet them, but they're administratively, they're helping us out with the paperwork. I'm pretty much like, you know, so I know most of the members because I'm one of the operations chiefs that is there every single day. So we have to learn to have a distinction between both.
A lot of agencies and a lot of organizations don't know actually what the actual role and responsibilities of a board of directors are. That's where the problem lies. If you ask a lot of organizations, what is your board of directors, what are they supposed to do? A lot of them would say, oh, they run the administrative part of the organization, which is false. Their job is they're the ones that's going to go out there, get you the money. But you still have to have the administrative personnel, the ones that keep your files. Like your chairman of the board should not be looking into membership folders. That's what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? That's what you're supposed to do. Like your one of your board of directors shouldn't be looking to see that one of your EMT EMT cards about to expire. Now they have to notify them. No, that's the reason why you have, administration.
And then I think we need more bandwidth. You know, I would love to have 10 different people do 10 different committees.
But you see, that's the same. So you have your board of directors, right? Then at the end of the day, you still have your president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. A lot of people get it mixed up because they feel like the vice president, secretary, treasurer is your board of directors.
Wait, do you have a separate board?
Yeah. So basically, we have a separate board. Then you have your president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. Your president sits on the board of directors as a director, but that's the only person. Everybody else is technically supposed to be not even involved, like a lot of times not involved in the organization because like it comes to a conflict of interest.
You know, like you talk about executive board.
Yeah, like the executive,
less involved in the
it's like the executive is the
board,
ones
but-
that who take care of like the administrative aspect. They're the ones that's filing for your renewal, or they're the ones that's let's say like paying like let's say paying the bills, but like dealing with the administrative portion, like making sure your files is up to date, making sure that they notify the person that, hey, listen, your EMT card is coming up expired.
So instead of having a committee, you're saying having a board.
Yeah, because if you look at it, because when I when I was studying about, non-for-profits, you have the board of directors, and then they have an executive board, then you have your operations. Sometimes now your executive board and your operations can interchange, like let's say I can be the secretary, but I can also still be on the operations, but I'm not gonna be on the board of
So
directors.
there's almost like three things that seem to me that's too much for an organization.
That
would be all over the
It
place.
seems like a lot. Some people mix it and say, hey, their executive board is their board of directors. A lot of places do that. But if you really look at it, it's supposed to be broken down 3 separate ways.
But
The
if you
board of
have the
dir-
executive board and you have the committee chairperson that's supposed to run a specific committee, it will work. So I'll give you a great example. Right now, our membership committee at Ridgewood is doing very well. Because the person that took over, I trained that person what exactly needs to be done for every folder, when it's going to expire and what he needs to look at and what he needs to put in the folder. Previously, you got to think about it. Other members are not training new people to take over. They're just like, here, this is for you, figure it out.
But then that's when you need to. Then that's when as the operations, if it's considered an operations issue,
It is.
then the operations need to sit down, the entire operations division, doesn't matter who it is, and say, hey, listen, what can we do to improve it? Because that was one of the things, like I said, when I came into Bed-Stuy, one of the things I had to look at and say, hey, listen, this is not right. Once we put people in position, now we all have to work together as one. Yes, I'm the chief operations. I am, the person that you go to, but, I'm working
But
with
see,
you
that's
guys.
your distinction. See, Jerry is chief of operations at Glen Oaks. He has other operations
Also, we
members
share
under
something
him.
together.
Yeah, so, but that's a good distinction. So you are the chief of operations, okay? Jerry is chief of operations. With our organization, we don't have that distinction.
But see, you have a captain. So where like we said earlier, some organizations don't like to go above the rank of captain. They don't believe that, especially with the size of the organization, it is necessary to have a chief and then a captain.
Okay, let
and
me
a
ask you a
lieutenant.
question, and this is out in the air here, because I know what the requirements in Glen Oaks to be the chief of operations. What's the requirement in Bed-Stuy to be chief of operations?
Before it was whoever can fill the position can, but we
They
said
didn't have to have no certification, nothing?
no. We had it at one point in time for a couple
Okay.
of years until we changed our bylaws. Because at one point in time, it was you had to be an EMT, but we changed it to not having to be an EMT. But then as we seen that a person who's not an EMT, technically, is not really embedded into the operations. Like, all right, like my job is I go through every ACR that comes through the organization. I'm on the QA/QI board. So every ACR that comes through Bed-Stuy, I read it personally, everything from the beginning to
So
the
you
end.
don't have anybody to actually help you out with QA/QI?
No, I do. I have a whole QA/QI
Oh,
committee,
okay.
but I take it my responsibility to read every ACR. I take it my responsibility to look at every tour log, to make sure that, especially now we're doing mutual aid with the fire department, to stay in constant contact with them, making sure that that log is filled out. It's more than the chief operation job than just medical, but a lot of it comes into play in medical. If they have an issue, like, hey, listen,
But that's what I'm trying to say.
when we implementing new, like we just implemented the apotropium into our pool, like a person who's not medical can't train you in that
Exactly.
because they don't know. So we made it to whereas you have to be an EMT and you have to be at least an EMT for at least 5 to 7 years to even consider being the chief.
See, that's a
operations.
little bit too long.
No, because I mean to cut you off, Henry. It's experience. You have to have experience.
That's what we
Repeat
need.
that.
You really have three things that you got to take into consideration. If you're going to work back and have a separate board of directors, then you got to figure out the administrative piece of the organization and the operational piece. Operations is really easy. It's what it is. Administration is somewhere between board and operations, but it really has to have its separate defined level of responsibility because there are pieces of the organization that's not board and not operations, but is day to day.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. So we have a lieutenant of administration,
Right,
okay?
right. But that, all you got to do is theoretically take your lieutenant of administration and just put it on the org chart separately. Operations should flow straight down. Anything that's operation goes under there. Anything that's administration goes there, and then you have the board.
But that's, yeah, that's administration.
I think one of the fundamental problems is that most of these organizations haven't looked at their organizational structure since they were formed back in the 1970s. And quite frankly, we've learned a lot in terms of nonprofit administration and an organization since then that they haven't caught up with. So they're operating more as a civic group / social organization than they are as a business operation. And, it's that transition that's going to be difficult for many organizations, but it ultimately is the transition that's going to help them survive and continue sustainability in the future. So the more that they look at themselves, look at their organizational structure and say, well, here's the board of directors. Let's outline and make sure that we have in our bylaws the definition of what the board's responsibility and authority is. Here's our operations office. Here's who they should be. What are their responsibilities and authority? And don't give titles out without defining responsibility. That's the biggest mistake we often make in EMS. And try to give the title a definitional role, like chief of operations or director of operations, as opposed to, captain or lieutenant or something like that. What does that mean? Without a definition behind it, it's an empty shell. It doesn't help the organization, doesn't help them to know what their responsibility is, and it doesn't help the board of directors to hold that officer accountable for what they're supposed to be doing. So I think that's the transition that a lot of organizations have to make. They haven't looked at that in 30, 40 or more years.
There's one thing I want to add to exactly what you said. There's something in business where it's okay to have one person in two seats, right? You can be the vehicle coordination operator and you can also be the QA, QI. What you can't have is what a lot of organizations have is two people in the same seats. And the reason that happens is because those roles and responsibilities have not been very clearly laid out.
Well, see, that's the reason why that, like I said, a lot of, like Henry said, a lot of organizations are still holding on to 1940, 1950 bylaws that, operate. No, it's not, it's the truth. So it's the time now, especially where this field that we're in has grown a lot. It's grown a lot over the past 30, 40, 50 years that we've been in existence. Now it's time for us, some organizations, to just say, hey, listen, let's go over our bylaws. Let's see what's going on now and use events like this to, say, all right, listen, this is what Glen Oaks is doing. Okay, Bed-Stuy is doing this. Ridgewood is doing this. Park Slopes is doing this. Okay, and it's working for them. Let's try to combine a bunch of this, that, and the third, all their, ideas and concepts, and bring it to the table and say, okay, this is what I can do for us.
I'll say, I know in my organization, it is a process to change the bylaws. You got to submit it, you got to vote on it, it's got to go out, it's got to be voted again. But in all honesty, and much to Henry's chagrin, is what I've discovered is it doesn't really make a difference whether you change a single word of the bylaws or if you throw them all in the garbage and rewrite it from the start to the top. In terms of how you write, I mean, you're gonna have to buy it, you're gonna have to convince people, but you're gonna have to go through that same process. And I think being open-minded to, I've been secretly drafting, rewriting my whole board of directors for a long time, but it's like, figure out like what does work for you. Maybe this is a plug to EMS Access, but like what does work and what doesn't work for you. We have some stuff that works awesome for us, but there's a lot of stuff that's like such a waste of time. We don't need this, we don't need this. And we've been changing this piece by piece, but what's the difference between changing it all at once and saying, or at least try this? Yeah.
So start the process. That's when you start the process. You bring it to you're bringing a issue that you feel is wrong. Now it's time to bring it to the board of directors. Say, hey, listen, this is what I feel. But don't bring it by yourself. Bring it with people.
No, that's what you have to do. The difference is, so I brought this issue up for numerous years at Richmond. Once I learned how they ran, I thought I was so confused with it. I didn't understand the difference between a captain and a president. It took me 2.5 years to figure out.
But you know what, because a lot of people, like I said, it's just the way, it's just the wording. It's the wording.
Well, no. So they don't have a captain at Glen Oaks. They have the president. Okay. Chief of operations. They do not have a captain.
But that's the reason. But see,
Exactly.
but that's what I'm saying. But you know, like that goes back to what I was saying. Their operations board and their executive board
Well,
is mixed together, and there's
all
no
right,
definite.
exactly. So Jerry reports to the board, but he's not a voting member. of the board.
The same thing I do. I report to the board of directors on things that I need.
But I could vote on my board.
Actually, I want to apologize because another weird thing about Glen Oaks, and not to put Henry down or build myself up. There's something here, but no, but so Henry is our president, but what does that mean? It's not like he honestly, he doesn't really have any power over any other committee.
He's a CEO of. the
He's a CEO. He's a president. It's not like he's in charge of the vice presidents. I mean, yeah, it's God forbid Henry's, traveling or sick or something like that. The VPs kind of step into place. Kathy's been in that spot, stepping into the president's place. But our president is not necessarily in charge. We have our board is 7 positions. I'm the treasurer on my board. I handle the finances, and then we have an assistant treasurer who also doubles up. Yes.
So the chair of the board is more in charge of the board.
Correct.
than the president.
Correct.
I know these things.
So, I mean, I think what works for Glen Oaks is that our president has very specific roles. Our president is unofficially ex officio. He's on every committee. He kind of selects every committee chair, but Henry's actually a very good president. No offense, past president. Henry's a very good president that he takes people's kind of feedback into account, saying who would be good for membership, who'd be good for training. And so he's kind of on every committee that he's kind of involved in a little bit of that administrative day to day and that level, but he's not in charge of it. He doesn't vote on any of these committees. And then of course, as president, he does a lot of public and meeting, obviously other volleys here.
Yeah,
or
but
something
that's usually what the
But
president
then the
does.
board is 7 people. So each board member has responsibilities, but then the board is 7 people do something that we might think of a president do. The president doesn't do, president's a signer of the banks. There's a lot of specific responsibilities, but our board as a whole is 7 people. It's hard to do much without having 7 people, kind of agree on, or at least 4 out of that 7 to vote on. So I think that's a really important thing.
I think the other good thing about it is, and what I've seen consistently in organizations that have failed, is where the president is both CEO and COO. And there's no check and balance. The one thing at Glen Oaks is that there's a very clear check and balance, between the operations chief and the president and the chairman of the board. I can goof up and do something, but, if I'm the president and CEO and COO, I can easily destroy the organization from one person's standpoint. I can't do that, Jerry can't do that, and Dave can't do that, because we have this check and balance in place, that if any one of us goes off the rails,
You're done. But see that.
and what we've consistently seen in organizations where we've tried to bring people together to collaborate, or to say to merge or consolidate, is that there's only one person holding all the strings, and there's no counterbalance to that person, and they take the ship down with them. And I think that you need to have a certain degree of checks and balances in the organization.
That's true.
The fallacy, the falling in Glen Oaks is that whoever is the CEO needs a little bit more management ability and authority than they have. But it's not catastrophic, because the 7 of us have pretty much been able to work together. And, where Dave has a crazy idea, Jerry and I will yell. Where I have a crazy idea, Dave and Jerry will say, no, that's off the rails. And
You sound like me.
consciously try to
Try to
bring
spend all the money.
and grab the new people. We
Me
try
too,
constantly
exactly.
try to bring the new people in and twist their arms to get involved. There's that conscious effort to try to do that, because we know that that's going to be the lifeblood of the organization. Are we always successful at that? No, but at least that's always in the mindset.
So now, how do you take an organization that doesn't have the type of knowledge, understanding of actually how to run an organization, and help them sustain? Because we've all at this table have been around.
You get an outside expert like Matthew.
Yeah.
Because even if we all talk to everybody and say the same thing, people are more apt to listen to the outside expert.
I said it,
In many- in
Yeah.
a lot of cases. Not all.
I said it this morning. A person needs to have the understanding that they could be wrong at any one time. For someone to say that something is wrong or you're doing something wrong. So we all pretty much try to collaborate. The issue becomes evident when you have an agency that one or two individuals have the extreme power and they are not held in any form of check or balance, and nothing gets done without those one or two people. Unfortunately, we've tried to bring collaboration and discussion-based items at many different times. There are agencies across the state that would not concede to that because of various siloed or fiefdom reasons. And unfortunately, I think that piece, however small, we won't be able to change. We can nudge and hope for the best, but it's up to their community. And that's why this whole thing about doing board of directors that have the whole community approach is involved, because it prevents that little piece that we're talking about now from happening. Right now, you have agencies that have too much control to the bitter end.